Guys, it's a real pleasure for me today to introduce to you our missionaries from Costa Rica, Julio and Ashley González. We've had an incredible relationship with these guys for the last few years. We've sent groups of people to their place and space to be able to help out at the Hope Center and their church. And so we're so excited that they're, for the very first time, coming to our church. As a matter of fact, this is the first time in their lives they've ever been to New England. So would you join me in welcoming Julio and Ashley González to Fellowship Church?
Hello, Fellowship Church. I hope you guys are doing great. We are so excited to be with you this weekend at Fellowship, and the partnership in the last couple of years with Fellowship Church and our work in Costa Rica, our ministry in Costa Rica, has been something so important that we're so grateful for. For the last 12 years, my wife and I have been working in Costa Rica, and our work has been twofold. There are two primary things that we have been doing, and it's the work of the church very much like the Fellowship Church. And then also at the same time, my wife has been developing this work that we call the Hope Center. Now we're going to have a second Hope Center in the next few weeks. And the Hope Center, as we have been learning, is a community center that is serving a community that is at extreme poverty. Now, poverty alleviation can feel like a very overwhelming thing, especially in a country like Costa Rica or most of the developing world where there are so many needs. You might feel the same way in your own community when you see all the needs around you. It can be a bit overwhelming. And what I want to share with you today came out of a conversation about this subject of how overwhelming it can feel when you think, what difference can I make to alleviate poverty in a country, or in a region or in a community? As my wife and I were talking about this, she started talking about this idea that when you see the life of Jesus and when you see the ministry of Jesus in the Bible, he never really took the whole idea of poverty in bulk, but he was really interested in individuals. He wasn't thinking about the people at large at once, but he was thinking about how can he engage with individuals. And that's a really cool thing. So Ashley told me one day, I believe that Jesus was really good about stopping for the one. And that's what we should do. And, as a good pastor, we're always looking for a reason, for content and for a sermon. And I told Ashley, that sounds like a great sermon right there. Stop for one. And that's the idea that I want to develop with you guys today. We really believe that we see in scriptures, again, a pattern of Jesus stopping for one. That's what we're trying to do in Costa Rica. And I believe we can do that in your community as well. When you see the life of Jesus and his miracles, for example, even though he was always around a crowd, and there was always a bunch of people around him. He was always engaging with individuals. In fact, there's one miracle that he fed 5,000, at least 5,000 adults, probably 20,000 people. But even in that miracle, he highlights one boy that had 5 pieces of bread and 2 pieces of fish. So it's a really cool thing how Jesus is always seeking out for individuals. There's another story in the New Testament that Jesus heals a man who was apparently there was this pool that they believe that water had a certain healing, so a lot of sick people will come around this pool, and then there would be a movement of the water, and whoever got first to the water would be healed. So Jesus goes to this particular pool, and he walks around a whole bunch of people that are sick, and he heals this one particular guy that he was interested in. And I was thinking, I can just imagine Jesus just walking around all these sick people laying on the floor, and he's like, excuse me, no, I'm sorry, it's not your turn. I'm going to talk to that guy over there, And I just think it's just so interesting, that in the scriptures, Jesus is always making us focus, or at least focusing on one person at a time. There's a conversation that Jesus had with one woman in particular that was found in the very act of adultery, and he engages with her one-on-one. My favorite parables in the Bible are the 3 parables that is really one parable: the parable of the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son. You might have heard this parable as the parable of the prodigal son. So in the whole focus of this trilogy of parables is how much Jesus is concerned with the one person that is not found, with that one person that is lost, over a whole bunch of people that might be found. So all that I'm saying is that when we think about the work that we do in Costa Rica, both in ministry, in the church, and in the work that we do in the community centers, alleviating poverty, it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like a big problem, a massive problem, thousands and thousands of people, a country like Costa Rica, especially after COVID, has been with over 20% of extreme poverty, and it can feel very overwhelming. And the way that we like to think about it is, like Jesus, we want to engage with individuals, one person at the time. That's the way that we believe we can make a difference, and that's a lot of what I want to share with you today. Now, my favorite part or story to illustrate this idea how Jesus stops for the one and how we should also stop for the one is a story of how Jesus healed a blind man, and this is found in the book of John. So I will read along, and then we'll try to put this in the screen for you, and I will read some of the text, and I will be making comments around along as I go in the text. Okay, so this is found in the book of John, and John chapter 9, and I'll start reading in verse 1, and it goes like this. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So here Jesus is walking along, doing his thing, and he goes and eventually he's going to heal this guy that is blind. The disciples see this guy that was blind, and the text tells us that he was blind from birth. And the disciples ask him, what's up with this? Why is this guy blind? Is it he that sinned or his parents? Now, the idea was they were operating under this thing that in the Old Testament, some theologians have called this the conventional morality of God. When you think about the book of Exodus and the book of the law, Deuteronomy, where you have all the commandments, all the things that you're supposed to do to obey the law, to obey God, all of that is known as the conventional morality of God. And what that means is kind of a fancy word that theologians use to illustrate a simple point. If you do the right thing, if you obey, you will be blessed. And if you don't obey, you will face consequences. That's the conventional morality of God. So with this context, this Jewish context, they're asking Jesus, because even in some parts in the Ten Commandments says that God will bless generations to come. So they're saying, wow, this guy or his parents parents before him must have been really bad. They must have sinned really bad. And they were asking Jesus to kind of, figure that out for them. Is it he that was a sinner, or is it his parents that were sinners? And Jesus answers in a simple word. He said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. So what he's saying is like, yeah, I understand that in your Jewish context, if you do good, if you do the commandments, you will be blessed. And if you don't, you will be cursed or you will face consequences. And I understand how you can think that he or his parents sinned. But in this case, this is like the unconventional morality of God. It's not conventional. It's not typical. That every once in a while, there's pain that has no apparent reason, that has no apparent purpose. And it makes us think, why are we going through this? Or why are so many people going through all these hardships that have not necessarily anything to do with something that they did? So Jesus talks about the work of God, the work that he's doing. And remember this, that Jesus came to this world to illustrate the Father, to show to us the way to the Father. He came on a mission. And his mission was to bring us back to a relationship with God. And Jesus is saying to his disciples, it wasn't him or it wasn't his parents. This is just so that the work of God can advance, can move forward. And he knew what was going on. He knew that he was going to heal this guy. The story is fascinating, and I hope that you will go to John chapter 9 and read the whole story. I'm going to jump around and tell you, jump forward in the text and tell you a little bit about the story. Jesus goes and heals this man. Eventually, this man does what any one of us would have done if we've been blind from birth and then we're healed. He's like super happy, super excited. And he goes to see his family, and the whole turmoil, happens because the Pharisees who were looking at this situation and they were always trying to catch Jesus doing something wrong or doing a blasphemy. It happened that it was a Sabbath, it was a day of rest that Jesus did this miracle. And by the way Jesus did this miracle was kind of gross. It was definitely a pre-COVID miracle, okay? Because he spits on the ground, he makes mud. Imagine how much he must have spit to be able to create the mud. He puts this mud in the guy's eyes, like sometimes, like if you go to the spa, they put some cucumbers in your eyes, to make you relax. Well, he puts this ointment that he made with his saliva in this guy's eyes. And then he tells the guy to go to the pool of Bethesda, and that he should go and wash this mud out of his eyes, okay, and that he will be healed. And precisely so, that's what happened. The guy goes, okay, I don't know how. I like to think, like, as any blind guy, he had some dark glasses that he would use. Okay, so I will use my little shades here as an illustration. He had his glasses on, and Jesus said, take your glasses off. He puts his little ointment on him and tells him to go wash. He goes and gets washed, and now he can see. And he did what you would do, what I would do if we had been healed. He goes to his family. He's having fun. He's excited. He can see for the first time. And then there's this huge problem around him. The Pharisees were not happy that Jesus did a miracle in the Sabbath. They were not happy that Jesus was speaking for God, because they had Moses, and Moses was the guy. Moses was the most important person for the Jewish people, because he gave the law. He gave the revelation of God. So there's this whole problem, and now they're interviewing this guy. Okay, so they're interviewing the blind guy. They say, tell us what happened. They ask him once or twice, and he tells them. He said, well, this guy came, and I asked him if he could heal me, and he put some stuff, some ointment, which I had no idea that it was bro saliva. I would have think about it twice. I imagine the guy would have said, if I had thought that he was going to do that. But anyway, I'm glad he did, because now I can see. And time after time, they're asking him, trying to understand if this was a trick, or if this was like some witchcraft or some weird stuff. And he's just telling his story. So we pick up the story in the second part. In verse 24, later on, for a second time, the Pharisees ask this blind person what had happened. And he tries to tell them again. And I'm going to read this to you. It says, a second time in verse 24, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man is a sinner, referring to Jesus. We know that guy is a sinner. The blind guy replies, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I know, I was blind and now I see. That's about my theology. The level of my theology is like, this guy healed me. Okay, I was blind and now I see, and that's where our wonderful hymn of Amazing Grace comes from. That phrase, I was blind and now I see. So they ask him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered, I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? And then he becomes a little sarcastic. Here's this blind dude who was a beggar at the temple door, engaging with the most sophisticated people in the society of his time, with the people that went to the best law schools available. And he's telling them the following. He says, why do you want to hear this again? Oh, do you want to become his disciples too? So he's now playing with them. He's been sarcastic. He said, and then they look at the way they responded. The scripture says in verse 28, they hurled insults at him, and they said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as to this fellow, this guy, this imposter, this dude, we have no idea who he is. And they're comparing Jesus to Moses. We have no idea where he came from. And now there's like a theological conversation between a blind man who was probably illiterate and the top of the society in that time, the people that knew more about the scriptures than anyone. The blind man answered, now that's remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes, the blind man says. Yet he opened my eyes. And then he talks theology with them. He says, we know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of the opening of a man born blind, the opening of the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he would do nothing. And then to this they reply, when he told them, maybe you want to be his disciples too. You are obviously not getting all your theology right. Who knows? They got so angry, and they basically insulted him even more. It was like a crescendo of insults. And at the end they say, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? A couple of minutes later, Jesus has an encounter with this guy. Jesus tells him, I'm the guy that healed you. And this guy decides to follow Jesus, to believe in him. And then later on, Jesus says the following thing. He says, for judgment I have come into this world, in verse 39. For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. So now Jesus stops talking about the physical blindness, and he starts talking about spiritual blindness. And what I'm trying to say with this whole story is that just like Jesus stopped for one guy that was in need, he wants us in this world to continue his work, his redemptive work, the work of healing this world, of bringing people back into a relationship with him. That's what we do in Costa Rica. That's what we do in the Hope Center. That's what we do here at Fellowship Church. He wants us to continue doing that work. In a way, Jesus is saying there's a purpose that I have for each of you, and I have invited you to partner with me. Think about this idea. If you own a business, or if you work for someone that has a business, think about this idea that God has invited you and me to be his partner. You are God's junior partner. I am God's junior partner. He does his part of the partnership. Now you and I need to do our part of the partnership. And he wants to heal the world, not only to heal the physical needs, but he wants to heal the spiritual needs. And he's seeing that the Pharisees, they were choosing to put on their blind glasses. They were choosing to see the world the way they saw it, to continue to see Moses and to continue to see their traditions. They could see that God was in the body among them, but they chose to stick to what they thought was right. And the reason is they couldn't see what Jesus wanted them to see. They couldn't be all about God's purpose for them because they were full of themselves. And I really think that even though the interpretation of this story is Jesus proving his divinity through the miracles and Jesus bringing his purpose to this world, I really believe that in the context of today, 2,000 years later, how God continues to heal our world, our communities, one person at a time, stopping for one person at a time, he is inviting you and me to be his partner in that work. And that's the history of civilization. God created and now we create. God did his creation work and now we do. God must be in heaven sometimes, I can imagine God thinking, look at my little children. I created birds and they created airplanes. I created them and they are creating all these great things. But there's also a redemptive work that he wants to do through you and through me. And we can fall into the same temptation as the Pharisees, to put on our glasses of the world as I see it and not realize that God is inviting us to do a great work of partnership with him. How well are you doing your junior partnership? How well are you doing your part of the work? And the point that I have today is that we will not be able to stop for one if we are full of ourselves. We are full of ourselves when we think about our needs, about our problems, and when we think about poverty, again, in the conversation with Ashley, feeling overwhelmed. It's a social problem. If they were not so lazy, if the government, it's a government problem, it's a problem of politics, it's a problem of political party, it's a problem of, the economy. What I know for sure is it's not my problem. And that's not really how the kingdom works. The way the kingdom works is that God has invited us to partner with him. Now, for me, we practice this when we, as a family, go serve in the Hope Center. About once a month, we try to go with our kids there. Not just something that my wife does for work, but we're trying to model that for them. But the reason that this is most personal for me is because when you think about my story, that's when things really come clear and come together. I grew up in a little town in Venezuela. It's called Barquisimeto, the town where I grew up. And when I was 3 years old, an American missionary moved from Tennessee to my town, and he started knocking on doors, and he started a Bible study, and he reached my family. My father was at that time in the hospital because he had been, since a very young age, he had been involved in alcohol and in all kinds of addictions. And his liver couldn't take him more alcohol. He was only 23 at the time. And the person who became our pastor, he went to visit him at the hospital. He prayed for him. Eventually, after 15 days in the hospital, my father started recuperating and became a good friend of our pastor. And he led him to the Lord. And he had an amazing life change that gave me the opportunity to grow up in a Christian home, gave me the opportunity to be every Sunday, every Wednesday night involved in our church, gave me the most amazing life that I could have ever dreamed of, just because one person and his family decided to do his job, to take his junior partnership seriously. He decided to take off his glasses of how he sees the world, and he was comfortable in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and he had his life and his problems and his economy, and he decided to think beyond and put on the glasses that God would want him to put on, and to see the world as God would want him to see. And he started one person at the time, one family at the time, and in his case, one door at the time. And that gave me an amazing opportunity to be here with you, sharing about God and about the scriptures, and to continue doing the work that we're doing internationally. So the reason that I'm saying that is it's way too personal for me. I cannot just be all about myself, about my agenda, about my goals. I am also worried about the economy. I'm also worried about gas prices. I'm also worried about inflation and interest rates. But I cannot just be all about me. So the question that I want to leave you with today is, who is the one that you should stop for? Who is the one that you should stop for? Maybe it is someone that will go on a mission trip to Costa Rica next year. Maybe someone in your community. Maybe someone in your neighborhood. But if you are a follower of Christ, He has called you to be His junior partner. And you cannot be all about His purpose, and you can never feel His urgency if you're filled with yourself. Jesus' invitation is to empty ourselves. Jesus' invitation is to stop for the one, but we will not be able to stop for the one until we empty ourselves. So may you, in the middle of all of your needs, in the middle of all of your wants, in the middle of all of your economy and all the bills to pay and all of the situations that you are facing daily, may you find strength in God, but may you also be committed to live for something bigger than just yourself. May you find that one that you're supposed to stop for. May you, like Jesus, stop for the one.